Segment 3, Gold and Black Live, and this is a treat for me. I'll say my long time. I've known Steve Lavin for since what 1988, 89. We haven't caught up. We spent 20 minutes before this interview catching up, but we can't air all that entire part of that interview. But Steve, welcome to Segment 3 of Gold and Black Live, and we're thrilled to have you on.
Great to be with you, Alan. Always good to connect.
Yeah, it's funny. We have some history, and going back to the times when you're a graduate assistant, obviously, for Gene Katie, and we could spend 2 to 3 hours telling Gene Katie stories. But Purdue's obviously, we'll talk a little hoops on the front end. Big game tonight. Michigan comes to Mackey Arena. The Boilermakers really coming on. Michigan has been one of the best teams in the Big Ten, if not the country in some ways. Just as from a thumbnail sketch, what do you see tonight in Mackey? And it will be a good game to sit on the couch and watch, one would think.
Yeah, no doubt. And when I look at Purdue, just impressed with their Road Warrior tour of late. Of course, well documented that they played 4 consecutive Big Ten conference games on the road, went 2-2 in that gauntlet. And I think it was the first time anyone had played 4 consecutive games in decades. And I know for Purdue, it's the first time since 1960. Yeah. So we're looking 60 years between having that type of challenging stretch. And yet I think they've come of age through that stretch, coming from 17 down against Michigan State to win in dramatic fashion. And, of course, going down to Indiana and getting the big win against their rival Hoosiers, who they've dominated of late during the Matt Painter era. And Ohio State, who was playing really good basketball, Purdue goes in there and wins on the road. And the fact they're winning close games and coming from behind, it speaks volumes about Matt Painter and his staff in terms of the decisions they're making, personnel on the floor, the sets and alignments that they're running, and the execution has been at a premium in late games. And that's good coaching and also a group of players, 5 freshmen in the rotation, and bringing them along. And for their, for them to be able to execute in tough environments on the road is really impressive.
Yeah, they certainly have been that. And yet the Big Ten is as loaded as you've ever seen it. Think about this, Indiana goes to Iowa and wins by 12 last night. It's really, the league is just from top to bottom, with maybe in one exception, Nebraska, and yet they can always be dangerous on their home court. Have you ever seen it like this? I mean, it's really, really stacked.
Yeah, I mean, it's the strongest conference in terms of the depth and the potential NCAA tournament bids that we've seen in college basketball since 2010-11. Matter of fact, that was my first year in the Big East at St. John's, and we sent a record 11 teams to the NCAA tournament. As a matter of fact, Connecticut finished 9-9 in league play, and then won the Big East championship, then went on to win the national championship. So really interesting. They actually went undefeated. They won the Maui Invitational that year, and they won the Big East tournament, and then they won the national championship in the NCAA tournament. But in the conference, they were 9-9, a 500 team, which speaks volumes about the strength and depth of that league. And I think the Big Ten is the best conference and has a chance to either tie or be close to that record-setting 11 teams that were sent out of the Big East.
Yeah, you were around at Purdue, and like I said, we could do a whole show of just talking about that. But in the days of Steven Scheffler and Trevion Williams is different. But there's one thing: Purdue's obviously had that history with inside players, not only under Matt Painter but under Gene Katie as well. Trey Williams is really developing nicely. If he could play the first half, he'd be even all the better, but because he's had foul troubles in several games of late. But what do you see out of him, and what do you see of his potential?
Boy, you're right about that Boilermaker history. You think of Jim Rowinski and Steve Scheffler and Brian Cardinal and Brad Miller, Melvin McCants. Let's give Kip Jones some love.
Yeah, there you go.
But there's something special about Trevion Williams. His poise and composure on his catches, his decision-making. He really enjoys the thrill of the pass, takes pride in his passing. And that's what makes them a tough matchup. You know, some big men you throw the ball to, and it's a black hole. It's never coming out. They don't see a cutter diving off the top of the floor. They don't know how to, you know, position themselves through their footwork or a bounce to throw a pass, a skip pass over the top of the defense. And Trey Williams is such an excellent playmaker. So he's ideal as the hub of the wheel for Purdue's offense on his catches. And think of the other 4 players around him as spokes on that wheel. And with spot downs and, you know, dives off the top of the floor and filling behind in terms of offensive spacing. And that's what makes Purdue so tough, is they're anchored well with Trey Williams at both ends of the floor. And you build championship level teams from the inside out. Yeah. And there are exceptions, you know, through the history of basketball with small ball. But ideally, when you're strong along the front line as Purdue is, you've got a chance to really be special. And I think it's about the development of those 5 freshmen. That makes Purdue's upside so intriguing as they continue to move down the line with each practice, each game opportunity. Come March, they're going to be playing like sophomores. They're no longer going to be freshmen, and they're getting the ultimate baptism by fire by competing in the Big Ten Conference and being well coached, of course, by Matt Painter and his staff. So a bright future, not only this year for Purdue, but down the line, when you look in that crystal ball, they're going to be special.
Yeah, you've had to deal in your professional career with recruiting battles and recruiting on both coasts. Matt Painter has a very unique, is it niche or formula, whatever it is. It's impressive of the kind of guys he gets. That seems to be, I mean, the Mason Gillises of the world, the Sasa Stefanovic, the guys that fit him well. Why is that? I mean, is it years of experience in figuring out kind of what you need? Is that Matt's, you knew Matt as a college player, as a college freshman. Is this DNA of how he develops and how he works?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of gifts, talents, traits, attributes, qualities, characteristics, whatever we want to call them. And he had an interest in coaching at a young age, and he was a student of the game as a player. So he was taking mental notes. He wasn't thinking about playing in the NBA. Yeah. He was thinking about coaching, and grew up around Pat Knight and Bob Knight, grew up around Big Ten basketball, and of course, some good coaches at Ball State, like Rick Majerus and Dick Hunsaker. And so I think influenced by his experiences as a player and a coach and being a student of the game, and then working under Gene Cady and Bruce Weber and Tom Ryder, and all those different stops and coaching at different levels informed a perspective where he sees the game through a certain prism or lens that is unique. And so he does put together groups that are capable of playing well together and working in concert and helping each other play to their strengths. And those were gifts that Gene Cady had in terms of molding winners. But Matt is his own man. You know, he's different than Gene Cady, and that's a good thing. That's why Coach Cady's so proud of him, because he always encouraged his assistants to be ourselves. Don't try and be like him. You know, you learn from others and you borrow elements and aspects, and it's great to have mentors, but ultimately you got to be comfortable in your own skin and with your own style of coaching. I think Matt is doing the best job of his coaching career with this team, and he's had some banner seasons. In my book, a National Coach of the Year, a couple times when he didn't get the award, but he's as good as it gets with his generation of coaches. I put him right at the top. And this year, he's maximizing, getting the most out of his personnel. And, you know, some of those late game sets with dribble handoffs, they do some excellent misdirection within their offense, and really has a good feel and seems to be enjoying coaching this team because he sees their upside. In a lot of ways, they're playing with house money. There's not the pressure, the expectations maybe of some years past. And Matt is thriving and really, I think, doing his best coaching of his career. And that's no knock, because he's been remarkable, and he's trending to the Hall of Fame in terms of his numbers. If he's the coach at Purdue another decade or more, which I think he will, he's going to go down as one of the all-time greats in Big Ten history.
Yeah, Matt Painter is a unique skill set, and I think guys also, and you can relate to this, we all are good if we can also change and morph. And he's got a way that he wants to coach, but I think he's matured at a level at each stop. He's a different coach than he was in 2010. He has different personnel. I get that, but it seems to me you got to always grow in this business, and he's done a good job with that.
Boy, is that ever an important, element or aspect in Matt's story, but also when you look through the history of the game, Coach Wooden, a former Boilermaker, started at Dayton, Kentucky as a high school coach. Then he went to South Bend Central High School, and then he was at Indiana State. He was in the service at one point, which is an education of its own, serving in the Navy. And then goes to UCLA, was there 27 years. And one of the remarkable parts of Coach Wooden was how he adapted and adjusted as time went on. He was coaching GI Bill guys at Indiana State and early at UCLA, guys that had come back from World War II. And then he also coached through the Korean War, Vietnam. You think about the, anti-establishment, civil rights, so many elements, the sexual revolution, the drug experimentation revolution. And yet he was able to still mold winners and instill the important virtues or values that he brought with him to California from that Midwestern upbringing. And so being able to adjust and adapt as Coach Wooden did, he took psychology classes every spring at UCLA because he knew that he was getting older, but the players he was coaching were still 18 to 22. And so to bridge that gap, he knew psychology and motivation and how to bring out the best in his student athletes was going to be the difference in sustaining a winner. And Matt has also demonstrated that same flexibility, curiosity. He's still interested in the game and refining and improving his coaching methods. It's a craft. Teaching and coaching is a craft like other industries. So salute to Matt Painter in terms of continuing to want to learn and grow, because his players, his teams, and ultimately the Purdue family all benefit from that type of leadership.
Yeah, he is unique, and he is a student of the game, loves the game for what it is, and knows, like you, knows the stories of the people that you're talking about and what their impact have been on the game for all those years. I remember with you, and obviously when you had your opportunities at UCLA, then went to work for ESPN. I thought, gosh, Steve's got to have his head examined to get out of the booth and go back into coaching at St. John's, and then come back to this. Give me just the insight of that balance between what coaches think, because you're a basketball guy and you love being in the gym, so to speak, but that temptation. I mean, your gig that you have now, you're one of the best in the country at it, but how do coaches, why does Urban Meyer go back into coaching? I mean, I don't get it, but from my perspective, I don't get it, but there's a good reason they do.
Yeah, I think, everyone is different, but, in my situation, I really enjoy working with young people. Yeah. And I enjoy the mentoring, the relationship building, the camaraderie with the players and your staff, and pursuing goals, trying to win a championship together, and that journey each season, the reset of a new beginning, and being on a college campus. My father was an educator. He was an English teacher and an author. He taught at Cal Berkeley and San Francisco State and College of Marin and Dominican College and Reardon High School and Drake High School. And my mom and dad raised 6 children on an educator's salary. So I grew up, on college campuses and around, a community of people that were educators. And so that's just in my DNA and my blood. And my dad, for him, it was, literature and words and language, poetry, that he really had a passion for. For me, it was coaching, and in basketball, different subject, but still wanting to work with young people and the competition. I mean, when you work at UCLA, Purdue, St. John's, you're talking about the Pac-12, what was the Pac-10, the Big Ten, and the Big East. And so the competition at the highest level is something that you miss, that rush of preparing a team for the NCAA tournament, making a run in the NCAA tournament, having your sights on a national title. And I was fortunate as an assistant to win a national championship with Mark Godfrey, Lorenzo Romar, and Coach Herrick, who was the head coach back in 1995. So those are special experiences that inform and kind of shape your sensibilities. And so if there was a good fit, I'd go back to coaching. But I'm also fully aware, having been in coaching and then had those sabbaticals in between coaching, those tours of duty, I know that if you go back in, you got to, have your armor and be ready, because it's a 24/7, 365 proposition. And, it deserves all of your energy. Where in broadcasting, there's a little more work, life balance, as they say. And I enjoy being away because I see things through a wider angle lens. And being out of coaching allowed me to spend time with my mother before she passed, and spend time with my father before he passed. And so it's interesting how the timing or the arc of your career really presents different gifts, and they're just different experiences. Being in TV allows me to be close to the game, still be able to learn and study and present for the viewers or the fans a certain perspective, having coached and then also having stepped away and then returned to coaching. But I definitely miss aspects of coaching, but I also realize there's something to be said for being undefeated and and not, having to go through the sacrifice that I've done before twice. And I'm not in a rush to do it, but if there's the right fit, I would consider a return.
Yeah, I think that's well said. You always have been, the thing I like about you, among many things, is you're optimistic. When you look at your Steve Lavin's face on TV and you have the sound down, he's optimistic, he's happy. I know you're not all happy every moment of the day. I get that. But but I think that's one of your most enduring characteristics, and something that carries you very well. How do you stay optimistic? We have a difficult society. We're in the middle of a pandemic. We've got social unrest. We've got challenges everywhere we turn. When you wake up in the morning, what keeps you with a smile on your face and keeps you optimistic?
Well, I think some of it goes back to, my mother and father, because the way they led their life was such a powerful example. And I still think the most powerful form of teaching is leading by example, whether it's parenting, coaching, teaching in the classroom, leadership style. And so they really set the right example for their children to follow, in terms of framing every opportunity as a gift to learn from. And so I'd say that's number one. And then also the mentors, from playground directors, youth league coaches, high school coaches, college coaches. And let's face it, Gene Cady, as influential as anyone in my life outside of my mother and father. And he was incredibly optimistic and would always reframe situations to see the possibilities, to aspire to get back on track. And yes, we might be battered, but we can still be beautiful if we're resilient and if we continue to fight back. And I'm borrowing from the beautiful poem at the inauguration the other day. So, and also I think it's just the best way to go. I mean, the reality is, I know in my life, if I were to look at the situation of my career over the last 32 years, anything but abundant and wonderful, it'd be pretty narrow-minded, pretty small-minded. I came from a town of 2,500 people in Northern California. I went to a college where the enrollment, Chapman University, was 2,500 when I was a student there. And to think that, I could coach at Purdue with Gene Cady, then coach at UCLA, and be able to spend 12 wonderful years in Westwood, and then to be able to go to New York and coach at St. John's. And in between, some hardship, losing my mother and father, missed a year of coaching with cancer, but I've been cancer free now for 11 years, if I'm not mistaken. So just gratitude and grace and graciousness is really, in my view, the way to go in terms of setting the right example, and also the way to kind of reframe every situation in your own life to see the goodness and the possibilities.
Well said, and amen to all that. I think and we're going to have two more questions in this segment. And though I'm serious, I don't know when you never have a real downtime, but we need a time where we can just go back and talk about 1988 to 91, because there's all kinds of stories, and you and I have some similar experiences. But I thought you're with Mike and with Jim Jackson on the set on MLK Day was very important. what you guys said. And again, this isn't a political statement. This is a human statement. This is about how we treat others and how we treat others with respect. Tell me about a little bit about that experience. And you're the white guy sitting between Mike and Jim and have a whole different life of experiences. But I could tell by what you said, and you can see clips of it on Twitter or in other social media outlets if you haven't seen it. But what that was like for you and what that meant to you in terms of not only that holiday, but that type of relationship.
Well, it's an example, again, right back to what we were just touching on, to be grateful and have true, genuine appreciation for a moment, to be able to sit between Mike and Jim, who have experienced something different than I experienced in terms of our upbringings and in terms of challenges and obstacles and aspects that, are real. And so I have to respect that. And then also trying to, show the respect, obviously, that Martin Luther King deserves, and pay tribute to him. And while our perspectives are different, Mike's perspective is different than Jimmy's is different than Mike's, right? And mine is different than both of theirs. And yet we share a common experience and a love of basketball. And so it was an opportunity that I'm grateful to be able to express, in some way, articulate in some way my appreciation for the courage that Martin Luther King demonstrated, when he didn't have civil liberties or freedoms at that time. And yet he was leading the charge, blazing a trail. And that courage is so inspiring. And the fact that he stood for equality and stood for humanity and dignity, and was able to influence generations and will continue to influence generations, even after his death, after his assassination. And so, to me, that inspires. And then to have that opportunity to share our thoughts together on a day where we're also celebrating basketball, but more importantly, in the grand scheme of things in life, Martin Luther King's legacy deserves the appropriate tribute.
Yeah, well said and well articulated that afternoon. All right, I have to have one story before we get in. We'll end on a positive note. You and I talked before this, the Yonut story, I call it, and I only heard this. I think we heard this at Gene Katie's reunion, but it's a great story of what it was like to be making a couple $1,000s a year or whatever it was as a GA at Purdue in the 1990s. Give us the Cliff Notes version of a story that when you were pulling up on a date to Yonuts, which was an old donut shop in Lafayette or West Lafayette, the corner of Yeager Road and Sagamore Parkway. It's still there, but it's a flower shop now. But it's a classic story of I don't know how you call it, some level of being a young man on a date with not a lot of money, but it's just a great story. Give us that.
Yeah, so interesting. At that time, I had just recently purchased, I believe it was 1990, Bruce Weber's metallic gold Pontiac Grand Am, and had the cool chrome mag wheels and sunroof. And so I was in heaven because it was my first car, and to be able to drive to work, drive to Mackey Arena and whatnot. So also first time I could really go on a date because I had a car. And actually the gal's name was Therese Biggie. Yeah. And so we were good friends. We go on a date and pull up to Yonuts, and Tony Jones happened to be driving by, and he saw the car, recognized it because Coach Weber had driven the car prior. While we're inside getting some yogurt, we were going to hold off on the donuts, but we did want some frozen yogurt with some nice little toppings. Next thing I know is the car is being driven away. I turn around, put the yogurt down and start running after my own car. Well, it turned out Tony Jones had slipped into the back seat of the Pontiac Grand Am and initially was just going to try and scare me when I got back in the car. But then he saw that I'd left the keys in the ignition. And so I'm figuring West Lafayette, it's safe, I'm not in New York or Los Angeles or some big, metropolitan city. Yeah. And so once he saw the keys in the ignition, he jumps in, starts to drive that car away. So I'm getting ready to call 911, call the cops to report a stolen car. And before I was able to get inside and to make that call, Tony Jones pulls back up. And so it was a kind of legendary, epic date night. And Yonuts in and of itself is kind of unique. My choice to go there is what a lot of guys ribbed me on. And then to leave the keys to the ignition, they even, ribbed me more on that. And thank God it was Tony Jones and not someone else, because he's one of our players and one of my favorite people. And obviously he's gone on to a successful career as an airline pilot and represented Purdue in a first-class manner. But he'll always have that one on me, no doubt.
Tony Jones, one of the toughest guards you ever – any team can use a Tony Jones. In 1990, he was – well, in his entire career, he was one tough guy and a great player. But I love that story. Now, you also – Bruce Weber sold you a lemon, right?
No doubt. That car, within a month or two, was done. And I forget what kind of value I got on the trade-in for, I think, a Honda. Yeah. Maybe a Honda Civic before I ended up making the trek to California. I think Bob Rorman may have hooked me up.
Yeah.
And gave me a good rate, or at least he made me feel like I was getting a good deal.
He's good at that.
No doubt. Yeah, there's nothing wrong with that. He'd be a good recruiter, right? Yeah. Always be closing. Alec Baldwin.
Yeah.
And Glenn Ross, always ABC, always be closing.
Yeah.
But so I kid Bruce about that as well. Now he says it was blue book value and, claims that he gave me a good shake, but that thing was done within a couple months.
All right. Well, like I said, we're going to do this again because I enjoy it, and we have there are a lot more good stories to tell. But we love your work on Fox and FS1, and we'll look forward to be watching it throughout the basketball season as well. Best to you and yours. And we will stay optimistic, and part of that happens because we get to talk to you. So that's a great thing from that standpoint too. So we're grateful for your time today, Steve. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Alan.
All right, we want to thank our sponsors. Obviously, Triple X, a place that Steve has been to, my guest, on the hill, but on the level of Purdue tradition since 1929. Hilton Garden Inn, and of course, State Farm agent Trent Johnson. We're grateful for them, and also to Gordon and Scott back in the studio. Our show ran a little long today, but it's great stuff, and we appreciate all you do for us. Steve, thanks again, and be well, and we'll look forward to seeing you in Mackey Arena before long on the campus here at Purdue.
Absolutely, Alan. Take care.
All right. Thank you.